welcome to Quarantine Cooking with Bill. We're going to try my third attempt at a good batch of sourdough bread. We are going to start by taking a look at the starter. I have had this at about 70 degrees just to kind of keep everything warm. You can see we've got a nice set of bubbles going. It's raised about half again as high as it was to begin with. We've got a nice dome going as well as a nice bubbly consistency. And I've got 500 grams of flour split between heavy bread flour and standard all-purpose flour. And I have 360 grams of water. The best way to do this is always to measure by grams rather than by volume because flour can get packed down tighter over time. So the first step today is to auto-lease the flour, which means that basically adding the water to the flour and mixing it together just to allow the gluten in the flour to start to develop. We're going to do that, get a nice mix in here, and then we will come back in about 45 minutes after the flour has had time to absorb the water and start to create the gluten strains, and add the levain, which is the starter, and the salt, and then we'll let it percolate again for a little while. Okay, we're back. We've allowed the flour and water to autolyse for about an hour. That allows the gluten structure to start to develop. All of the water has absorbed into the flour grains. We have measured out now 9 grams of table salt, which is going to go into the mixture. And then I'm going to put this on top of here and tear it out to a 0. And we are going to add 112 grams of starter into the mix. It's lovely and goopy and gross. So we've got the starter, the salt, and the flour, which is auto-leased, in the bowl. We're going to just start to mix it all up by hand. It's going to be a very sticky, very runny mixture. Pull the outside away and lay it over the top, using your fingers in a pinching motion, pulling it up, and repeating that motion again. Each time that we do that, we're trying to get that starter mixed deeper in, and also creating a little bit of a punching motion to stretch out the gluten strands. It's a very wet, very sticky dough, which is what we want because that allows the bubbles to form, and as the wild yeast starts to rise. I'm fairly pleased with the way that's starting to come together. It's starting to pull away from the sides. We've got a fairly nice stretchy blob of dough. Now, we're going to allow that to rest for about a half an hour and then come back and punch it down again. Okay, so we're back. We have waited a half an hour, and we've had a chance for the starter to absorb into the dough. And you can see that it's starting to look a little bit smoother and a little more glossy. So what we are going to do now is a series of folds about every half an hour for a couple of hours. So we reach in, pull forward, see how much stretch we're getting here. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. There we go. Folding it over and tucking it back down. Then we're moving to the next side. We're going to do this on all 4 corners, just like we were working on a compass. So each of the corners, pull forward a little bit and tuck it back over. And each time we do this, we're developing gluten, get a nice stretch going on. That's going to allow the carbon dioxide to create nice bubbles once we start letting this proof and rise. Here we go. You can see it's also starting to pull away from the sides of the bowl a little bit. We're going to cover it back up. And we're going to set the timer again for another half an hour. There we go. Half an hour, and off we go. We are back for our third turning, and you can see how nice and stretchy this is becoming. Okay, one more rest, then we'll do one more stretch, and we'll set it aside to rise. Okie dokie, we are back for the final fold. It's been resting for another 30 minutes, so we're going to do our routine one more time. Pulling out, stretching the dough, and laying it back on itself. Pulling out, stretching the dough, laying it back on itself. Doing that on all 4 sides of the compass. We've got some pretty good gluten structure going now, and the dough is in great shape. And now we let this rest, and this will be our first big prove of the dough. So what I'm going to do, so that we can actually see this for the video, is put a little bit of cooking oil on the inside of a glass bowl, and I'm going to turn out this beautiful lump of dough into this glass dish. Come on, let go, all the way. There we are. It's very sticky dough, so it tends to stay with you. We will cover this after a little spray of cooking oil to help keep it from making a skin on its top, and cover it down nice and tight. Now, this is going to prove for 3 or 4 hours, or at least until the dough has started to double in size. Okay, we are back. It has rested for about 4 hours, and the next step is going to be what they call a bench rest. We're going to take it out of the bowl here, and we're going to shape it gently and then let it sit for another half an hour just to let everything kind of set itself back up before we do the final shaping, put it into the basket, and we put it into the refrigerator overnight. So we're going to start with just a light dusting of flour across the workspace. Keep it from sticking. A little in the hands. Kind of help keep it from sticking to me as well. There we go. Now we're going to turn this out. It's going to be still a really nice sticky dough, but it's lightened up a lot on that first rise. The baker's best tool, a bench scraper, which is going to help bring this dough over and allow me to pull it up off the desk, because it's going to stick to the scraper a lot less than it is the hands, even with a little bit of flour. So what we're going to do is stretch it out a little bit this direction and a little bit this direction. So we've got it in a rough rectangular shape here. We're going to take the outsides, we're going to cross them over and pinch them together. The same thing in the center, cross it over in the middle, trying to pinch that together into a nice seam, bringing in the insides. Then we're going to take it from the outside, pull gently, and start just rolling it up into a nice firm ball. We take a little bit of flour here, just set it out there on the sides. And we're going to take this, scrape up here nicely, and let it sit right there and rest for a little bit. And we'll be back in about a half an hour. Okay, so we are back. It has rested for 30 minutes, and the next step is going to be shaping the dough and then putting it into a basket or a banneton to rise overnight in the refrigerator. On the interwebs, you can purchase one of these. This is called a banneton. It is made out of a rattan material, and you line it with either a piece of linen or muslin and flour it. I didn't have that, so I used some scrap mattress that I had that is 100% cotton, washed it and set it up. This time, however, I'm going to try and make a loaf-shaped pan instead of a round one. So I've taken a standard loaf pan. I have filled it with a piece of the madras linen, and inside of it I have floured it well, because as this goes, it's a very moist dough. So as it sits and rises, some of that is going to be sucked out by the flour, and you don't want it to be sticking to the linen or the fabric later on. So we're going to take this off. We covered it just so that it didn't develop a skin. Take the bench scraper back out here, and we're going to bring this back over and place it here. It's nice and sticky again, so I'm going to use just a tiny bit of flour to keep me from sticking to it. And we want to pull it out, kind of give it a nice rectangular shape again. You want to be careful with it this time, because we don't want to lose all of the air bubbles that we've created by letting it rise. But as we go here, we're just going to pull this out a little bit, let it stretch, try and get it about the length of this pan. And then you take the corners, fold them over again, and you want to try and roll it in so that it sticks to itself. Now see, I have put a little flour on there and it's not as sticky as it ought to be, probably. Then, once you've gotten that shaped into a shape that's approximately right, we're going to roll it over and I'm going to start bringing it towards myself using some pressure underneath, using my fingers to try and create a little bit of surface tension across the top, pulling that tight, because that's going to give us the nice smooth crust that we're looking for later on. So each time I pull it towards myself, I'm just pulling underneath and pushing underneath and then rolling that way. Now I've got something that's pretty close to the size of what I'm looking for here. So I'm going to take my scraper again, loosen it up, and plop it into my basket, seam side down. The last step is take just a little bit more flour here, dusting around the edges a little bit so that as it rises and makes contact with that fabric, it's got this nice layer of flour to kind of keep it from sticking. And we are all set. We got a nice loaf. It's sitting gently in its basket. We're going to cover that again with this piece of plastic, and it's going to go into the refrigerator to rise overnight. So we'll be back tomorrow morning.
The next morning.
Okay, good morning. We are back. We have spent the night proofing the bread in the refrigerator. That gives it a chance to develop a little bit more flavor and to tighten up the core of the loaf. It's looking pretty good. One of the ways that you can tell that it is ready to bake is that if you press it gently, if it does not bounce all the way back, that means that it is ready. If it bounces completely back, that means it still needs a little bit more time to proof. If when you press it down and it does not spring back at all, that means that you've let it go too long and your yeast has exhausted itself. We've got the oven preheated at 490 degrees, which is as high as my oven goes. Recipes recommend 500 if you can do it. As I mentioned the other day, most of the recipes that I've been looking at have come out with a round bowl-shaped loaf. I'm trying something new today and putting it into a loaf pan to see if I can get something that's a little bit more sliceable for sandwiches. So what I'm going to do is start out, first of all, with a piece of baking paper, which is literally just paper that has been lightly coated with Teflon to help keep it non-stick. We're going to take that, we're going to place it right over the top of this, and we're going to flip this loaf out and see what we look like. Pan comes off. You can see, I don't know if you can or not on the camera, how some of the moisture has seeped from the bread into the cloth, and that's a good thing. It's drawing it off enough to give it a little bit more of a crust. But that flour allows it to peel off fairly nicely. I'm going to give it just a little bit of a dusting of flour here on the top, mostly for prettiness. Then we're going to slice straight down using a sharp razor. What I happen to have is a home razor rather than a bread maker's razor, but it's going to allow me to get a nice cut right down through here. We're going to score through that. That just allows the bread to rise in the places that we want it to rise rather than anywhere that the crust wants to split. And then we're going to take it over and put it into the oven. Okay, we have moved over into the oven, and earlier I preset the oven and started preheating it. Inside I've got a couple of heavy-duty aluminum pans set inside, and I preheated the oven with those in there. That will give me a little bit more ability to retain some heat for baking the crust. And I've got a small baking pan in there that I'm going to use to allow me to put the bread into the oven. And you can see how that cut has opened up nicely right there on the top of the bread. We're going to slide that in here. And then in here I have another pan, a little bit of water to create some steam, which will help us develop a nice crust. Slide that back in there and close this oven up. Now we're going to set this for 20 minutes. And then we'll come back and lower the temperature.
20 minutes later.
It's starting to rise really beautifully. It's starting to get a good crust on it. You can see the flour starting to crack around the edges and giving it that lovely pattern. Our timer just went off, so we are going to reduce the temperature to just under 450 because it's baking nicely and it's browning well. My oven tends to cook hot from the back, so I'm going to rotate it real quickly because I can already see it starting to brown up really hot in the center. And we're also going to add a little bit more steam in the way of some ice cubes tossed in here into my drip pan in the bottom. And now we wait for another 20 minutes.
More moments later.
All right, our 20-minute timer went off, and let's see what we have got. And it looks like we have a pretty nice sourdough bun. I'm told that when you lift it up and knock on the bottom, it should sound nice and hollow, which this one does. So we're going to take this out and let it cool, and we'll be back in about an hour to see what the slicing looks like.
2 hours later.
All right, so we are back for the final test, the cutting of the loaf. Let's find out what we've got inside. This is the test. Nice firm crust. Some nice open spots, a little glossiness there from the gluten. I am pretty pleased with that. I guess the last thing is going to be the taste test. So a little butter on there because there's nothing better than fresh baked bread with butter. And I use the real stuff, not margarine. Okay, the final moment that I have been waiting for. Find out what we've got here. That's a good piece of bread. Thanks for watching.